So we're going to rock and roll. It is actually a really, really special episode for me. I've been podcasting for 3 years and I've always said that I want to get my dad, who for me is one of the most influential people that I've ever met, obviously, is my dad. And I know that you've got lots of wisdom to share. So thank you very much for coming on the Counter Offer.
Pleasure to be here. Great to be here.
Brilliant. I love to ask people this question when we start because I think it's really interesting because everyone's different. What would you say your purpose in life is?
My purpose in life, well, it's not just one purpose on its own. I suppose there are a lot of different things. The family is very important to me.
Right answer.
And I want to be doing something that hopefully makes the world a better place. Obviously, I want to enjoy what I do. I want to achieve something. I suppose I'm an achiever. I like to feel I'm moving in some direction in life. And if I can do something that helps other people as well, obviously that's important to me.
Nice. And I see that in everything that you've done, the helping people in your career. Also, I think one thing that I would always say about you as your daughter is that you're very comfortable with change. And that also lies in with my work and a lot of the listeners who do get into situations where they have to make changes. And a lot of people are allergic to change. They don't want to make change at all. So for anyone listening who maybe is thinking, do you know what? I've been in this job for about 5 to 10 years, but it's safe, it's comfortable. You have, although you've been very loyal to specific organizations, you have changed your career a few times in quite a different senses. So at what point can someone know that it is time to make a change?
Well, various things come into that. It's true, I do like change. I'm better actually when I'm changing something and developing something. I think there are innovators and consolidators, and there's some wonderful consolidators around. I'm not a very good consolidator. For me, innovation and change is very important. I think I learned that quite early on, actually. When in my first job, I saw a few things that I felt that could be changed. We could make that better for people. Mm-hmm. And from that moment onwards, I was always looking out for things that might be changed. But managing the change is the art, and change can be difficult. And a lot of people are a bit nervous of change if it affects them. And as a leader, as a manager, you've got to be very careful how you manage that change and do it so that it is acceptable to others, that it is as comfortable as it can be. Of course, sometimes people find it not so comfortable, and then you've got to help them through it.
What if I'm somebody who's working for a company and I know that there needs to be change, but it's not my job. I'm not a manager. It's not my job. How can I manage upwards to ensure that changes are made? How can I go about having that conversation with my manager to suggest changes?
Well, I suppose first of all, you'd probably talk, I guess, to colleagues, because that way you'll find out whether you're a loose cannon and looking for change which really isn't suitable, or whether there's a general feeling that change should be there. You can get some feeling from others. And then I suppose it's approaching the manager, the director, whatever, the CEO, and saying, I've got a few ideas. What do you feel about these? You'll soon get an idea whether this is going to be a manager who is open to change or not.
Definitely how they receive it. I think some people, when they go and suggest change to managers, they do it in quite it's how you do it. If you go and say, well, I'm not happy about this is not working, or the negative things, you're not going to be heard. But it's like you just said, here are my ideas, and pose it in a positive way.
Absolutely. Terribly important. I mean, the way you put things is very important. It's worth spending time always with any difficult conversation thinking, how do I get this across? What's the best way of getting this across? And also the process you use, for instance, writing can often end up being not the right solution. The words perhaps don't come over quite right. Phone call is perhaps halfway, but face-to-face, especially if it's a slightly difficult subject, I would always go face-to-face if possible.
Yeah, a lot of people avoid face-to-face for the difficult conversations with managers. And I think a lot of that is maybe if they're feeling emotional or they feel that it might not come across in the right way. And just a little tip for anyone who's listening, something that I found really useful for more difficult conversations is you can actually put things into ChatGPT and say, this is what I want to say, but I want to say it in the most warm and effective way to get the best possible outcome. I know you like to try and do that yourself, but there is...
I do, but I'm happy. I'm open to ChatGPT giving me some ideas. Yes, certainly. But I think it is worth spending time on how to get the message across. And as you said, keeping everything positive. What can we gain from this? There are going to be some difficult bridges to cross, but it's looking at that target, trying to find ways through in a positive way.
Definitely. One thing that is really noticeable in your career. And one thing that I've noticed just watching you, just growing up, is you've always put yourself into uncomfortable situations where many people, we say when you get promoted to leadership, you're promoting yourself to incompetence before you become competent, right? So what advice, there'll be lots of people listening to this who are maybe recruiters who are going into managerial roles, going in to manage a new team when there's an existing team. What kind of advice would you give to those people to get the trust of the people that they are managing day one? It's quite a daunting situation for a new manager.
It is. I mean, I wouldn't try and change everything straight away. I mean, you have certain things that you just feel have got to be changed. So really focus and work out which are the absolutely essential things that need to be changed, but also looking for the good things that are there as well. It's very easy to forget the good things that are going on and building on those so that people feel a confidence building from what is going well. Hopefully something is going well. And then working out what needs to be changed urgently, what can wait a little bit, working out the timescale, the pattern, which people can take how much. I mean, some people can take a lot of change. You sense that straight away. Others, it needs a little bit more building of the relationship before you get there. But I think within all that, you've got to show confidence in the people. You've got to show trust in them. If they feel that you trust them, then it's all going to work much better. And that means taking time to get to know them. So really get to know the individuals.
Yeah, that's trusting. So important, isn't it? And I think that's one thing that a lot of managers, they come in and they're so keen to prove themselves. They just want to make that change and they get sort of involved. And then people, you forget about the people who are scared of the change and the people who are like, wait, who are you? This is how we've always done it. And yes, maybe it does need to change, but you need to also cater for the people who are afraid to change. I love that answer.
Yeah, I think, yes, and one learns by getting it wrong sometimes. I can think of a few occasions early in my career when I didn't gauge it right and I perhaps brought in the change a little bit too soon, or it was something that wasn't quite thought through fully. You do need to think these things through.
That's a good point, actually. So what would you say if you could go back, let's say, to the beginning of your career when you started management? If you could go back and say something to yourself to make you better at your job that you didn't know then that you know now, what would you say to yourself if you could go back in time, starting your first managerial job? What would be the best tip that you could give yourself?
I would spend more time getting to know the individuals, getting to know the place, getting to know the background scene of everything. I wouldn't go along with preconceived ideas to the extent that perhaps I did, because different organisations operate in different ways. And sometimes you can transfer something through from place A to place B, but other times you definitely can't. And it might not work in that new place.
Definitely. Obviously, you're my dad, so I'm going to say you're an interesting person. But I think you're a very interesting person in the sense that a lot of people, when they get to your point in life, they think, I'm going to retire. I'm going to just stop and maybe, I don't know, sit down and watch TV all day, have a few beers. But you're very much of the go, go, go. And you've got this new thing that has just happened. So in March, can you tell listeners a bit about your new opportunity that has just come up?
Well, yes, it's something different again. I've worked with charities before, and of course, much of my career has been in education. But this is a bit different. It's a charity, the Samaritans, the National Samaritans. I've been a Samaritans volunteer with the Cardiff branch for 4 years. I've learnt so much in that. I mean, if I had my time again now as an educationist, I would put Samaritans training on the list for every sixth former in the schools that I worked with, because I think it's such a wonderful way of discovering empathy, listening, how to deal with different situations. Anyway, yes, I've been working as a volunteer doing shifts, and they have a selection, well, sort of election, it's a selection really, where the branch chooses someone to be the next director for 3 years. And it was a total shock when my name came up for this. And so I've said yes to doing it from March. So I'll have 3 years back in management, running something again on a volunteer basis. And I'm really looking forward to it.
Amazing. Yeah. And for anyone who is listening to this, the Samaritans, can you just explain quickly what the Samaritans do?
It's primarily a telephone service, although there is email and online chat as well, and in some branches face-to-face, but primarily telephone, where you have people manning phones 24 hours. There's a national number, 116 123, which you can call at any time of the day or night, and we as Samaritans are there to listen primarily. And if we can help by listening and hearing and being there for somebody, then that's what we want to do. We're not there to give advice as such.
Nice. And I want to talk about that a bit more later. But first of all, on the fact that you were seen as someone who could be a leader, right? People didn't really know your background. You were kind of pinpointed as someone, okay, we'd like him to be a leader. If I'm somebody who's working for an organisation, I want to be recognised as someone who could lead. What did you do you think, that made people think, do you know what, Lindsay Gray would be a great leader?
I'm not absolutely certain of the answer to that, because I wasn't actually pushing for the leadership, and I didn't actually apply for it, because you don't in the Samaritans. So looking back, I did become a mentor actually to some new Samaritans. And so in that sense, I was helping people come through, and I helped in a few other specific areas of fundraising and in outreach. So I suppose I was doing one or two things beyond the basic shifts, and getting to know people and listening to them and hearing them and learning.
Yeah, I think there's
So that
three
was it,
things there,
really.
isn't there? There's that mentorship, that listening and learning, and going beyond the actual role. Those are three really good points. So if you are listening to this and you're thinking, do you know what, I want to be seen as a potential leader, I think those are some really, really key things. Now, when I think of recruiters, I think of people who are working very long hours, and I speak to them regularly. They're trying to get a better work-life balance. Some of them are potentially facing that burnout, and they're struggling to find that time for self-care. Now, one thing a lot of people don't know about you is that you did have a tough time. And I remember, because, and I don't know how comfortable you are me talking about this, but I remember because I was probably about 12 or 13, and we were just sat at home, and I can't remember why or what it was, but I've never seen a man or my dad cry. And it was quite a poignant time, I suppose, for me, because you think, oh, parents, they're strong. Like they never have any weakness. And I think when you grow up, you start to realize they're human. So I've never asked you actually, how did that happen? Like, how did you experience that burnout? What do you think happened there?
Well, yes. In fact, you were a bit older. You were 19 at the time, because it was,
gosh.
it was in 2005. And I had been working very hard. We'd done a lot of development at the school. We'd built the cathedral school in Llandaff, and we'd built the numbers up a lot, increased the age range. And so there's a lot of extra work beyond the normal work of a head teacher. And we had an inspection looming as well. I was running a local choir. I was doing a lot of extra stuff and playing quite a bit of sport. I was probably just doing too much. Well, I was definitely doing too much. And suddenly there was a crash point. I hadn't really seen it coming, if I'm honest, but there was a crash point. And one day I woke up and I just felt very, very tearful, very, very low indeed. It was something new to me. I probably should have spotted it, because there was one occasion previously, although it was new, when there was a little hint of this back in 1988, when my then head, Richard Morgan, of the school I was in, who was a fantastic inspiration to me, noticed this and encouraged me to go off for a few days and spend some time on the golf course, which I did. It helped enormously. I should have spotted that earlier. But this time it was much more serious. Now, it was really a breakdown, a mental breakdown, a burnout. I had to have a few weeks off school. In fact, it ended up being 2 or 3 months away.
And did people know at the time? Because I remember it was kind of like, he's off for health reasons, but it wasn't kind of talked about. And even then, I mean, we're saying our ages now, but how long ago was that? We were talking, 15 years ago or something like that. It wasn't talked about. People didn't talk about mental health in the same way that they do now. No. Had it have happened now, it probably would have been something that we'd been more open about, maybe, do you think?
Yes, I think that's true, although I rather liked it to be open. For me, the best way was to talk about it. And there were 1 or 2 people in particular who helped me, because they'd been through the same sort of thing. And being able to talk to them and to talk about it, for me, worked very well indeed. And I think I got through it much more quickly than I otherwise would have done by analysing it, talking about it. I went to a counsellor for a little bit, but it was actually the friends, the family, and going through it and analysing what had happened that helped.
It's really, I think there'll be people listening to this who are inspired, because I think also of your generation, it's something that a lot of people don't talk about because they're afraid of looking weak and stuff. I've always thought the fact that you do speak about it, and especially in men, because they say there's a massive rise of mental health problems within men. If you could look back now and you could sort of describe how it felt to anyone who might not be sure whether they are going through something. I mean, it's a difficult question, but how did it feel?
Well, firstly, it's true about men, because in Samaritan schools we hear quite a lot of men and women with mental health issues, and often they don't want to talk to their friends about it. And the first point of call is the Samaritan call, but I didn't go down that route. As I say, it was talking. How did it feel? Each day you woke up and felt very, very low indeed, lacking in energy. Everything was sort of dark and miserable. I couldn't understand how anybody could be enthusiastic or cheerful about anything anymore. I'd been enthusiastic for a whole life. I am now. I've got enthusiasm about all sorts of things, from music to sport, well, all sorts of stuff. But I could not get to that position of enjoyment, fulfillment, enthusiasm, energy, all that had gone and everything was drab and dull.
And which is scary for people around you. And I
Yeah.
think there'll be a lot of people who maybe not only going through this, or might be in situations where they've got a colleague who is going through
Yes.
something similar. Having been that person who is having a breakdown or having something that they're going through, how should others act around them? How should they, because sometimes people think it's better to do nothing. How do you show your support to someone when you know that they're going through something?
I think others can show support. It is difficult to know where to come in sometimes, and you get a sense. I do sometimes say to people now, it looks as though you're probably having a bit of a tough time at the moment, or if there's something you want to talk about, or I find some sort of gentle way into the conversation if I think something's wrong. But you have to step back if you feel that they're not ready to talk, obviously, and sometimes they aren't. But I suppose, again, the Samaritan's training and having gone through that experience myself helps me to know how to listen and to be able to listen. And quite a few people have come and chatted about their difficulties. I suppose I've also experienced a bit of that in the mediation work I've done. Did mediation work for a time, and in that sometimes you get really sort of down into the lower levels of people and how they're feeling and some of their deeper senses.
It's so interesting what you said as well about the person who noticed. Sometimes people don't notice, and it's just validating, are you okay? Like maybe offering them that kind of, maybe it would be good to go and have some time out and play some golf, or and I guess it's the way you do it, isn't it? Because you don't want to do it in a patronizing way.
No,
I'd be
that's
worried about saying that to someone in case it sounded patronizing. So
yeah, there are different ways of going in. It depends on the person concerned. You have got to handle it carefully, and you don't want to be encroaching, because some people just aren't ready to talk about it, but others are. Because if you can show to them yourself that you have been through something, often that does open the door for them to be able to speak.
Definitely.
So I'm very willing to do that. I will talk in as much depth as needed about what I went through, because I learned so much from it. And I think I came through it and out of it more quickly by talking in my case, but obviously have different approaches.
And now, how do you stop yourself from going back into that? And as someone who's never experienced it, I'm quite naive, so I don't really understand. And it's useful to kind of understand how one can avoid the kind of patterns that can get you into that.
Yeah, I've learnt to say no to things. I was taking on all sorts of stuff, which I shouldn't have done, extra things. And
yes, people. There are so many yes people around.
Yes, I was, and I probably am like that. I'm much more cautious now, and I balance things out. I look at the diary more carefully. I allow myself breathing space, which I didn't. I don't think to myself, oh, you could do that. You've done it before. You can do it. I realise you can't. And of course, as you get older, sometimes you can't do quite as much anyway. So I'm much more careful. I make sure I always have some of the recreational things. I love playing table tennis for a moment, and I still enjoy singing and doing choirs, going out for countryside walks. There are plenty of things I enjoy doing, and above all, spending time with the family. And I think some of those things had gone by the board, if I'm honest. It was work, and work was taking over.
And it can swallow you. So many people sort of think they work in the city and they think, right, this is what I need to do for my family, for everything. I just need to work. And it becomes addictive.
It does. And I think also in that, I learnt more to delegate. I mean, over my career, I've gradually learnt more to delegate. And the fact that delegation is the answer, of course, is empowering other people as well as giving you the breathing space. You gain the vision to have an oversight of something rather than getting into the nitty-gritty and the detail. You're hopefully enabling others and hopefully inspiring others. And all that is connected with it as well, being a manager. A lot of managers feel they've got to be seen to be working flat out all the time. It's not actually essential and often not a good thing.
Definitely. So if there are people maybe who haven't got the luxury of saying no to things, and maybe their boss is giving them so many tasks, or the manager is saying, we need you to do this, we need you to do that, and they running around like a hamster on a wheel, and they don't know how to stop. What advice would you give them? Because I know they've got tools like you've got meditation, stuff like that. Like, what do you feel is at their resource table that they can use immediately before maybe making a change?
Well, yes, I mean, there are certain tools, like you mentioned meditation. I certainly used that at one stage when I was feeling a little bit pressurized in my work. But yeah, they hopefully themselves might be able to delegate something to somebody else if they are a middle manager. But if they're not a manager, and it's only in connection with their own manager, they really have got to go and talk about it. And perhaps, again, it's that positive approach, isn't it? Saying to their manager, their boss, whatever, I can do this. I think I've got some really good ideas of how we can develop this. But in order to do this, I'm going to have to let go of one or two other things because it's not all doable.
I love that because it's focusing on what they want to achieve. Yeah. It's saying, in order to do this, outcome first, I need to do this because I'm a human. I'm only capable of doing so much. So I think that's a really, really valid point. And I know it's kind of delving quite deep. And I know you're not a psychologist. It's not what you do. But if there are people maybe who are just having horrible, because you're dealing with the Samaritans quite a lot. Do you have any advice for people who maybe are feeling really low? I know you talk to suicidal people. What advice can you give them immediately? Because I'm sure that the Samaritans save lives.
They do, and yet it's in an unusual position there because you don't actually give advice as such. But hopefully you can help people to find their own routes and find some options which work for them. But you've got to help others find that way, find that route, and catch that glimpse of light. You sometimes say, okay, we can see all those dark things there. Is there something that you just find uplifting occasionally? Is there somebody that you see from time to time who you find inspirational or helpful in some way or other? That might be just one person they know that just lifts them. It's finding that glimmer of light, that route.
And then focusing on that and listening to that.
Building from there.
No, that's really
For some people, if they've reached a very low level, it's very difficult for them to
scary.
Find that.
Like when you're talking to these people, what a great service that is. I wanted to speak a bit about, because I know that you've done quite a lot of mediation in your career. I know you're doing more of it now. And there's a lot of conflict that happens in the workplace. So there are a lot of people in offices, and I get them calling me saying, this person I cannot work with this person. That's why I want to move the job. In fact, one of the main reasons that people move roles is because of managers. It's not because of money. It's not because of progression. It's because of management. And often that's because of conflict. So, and it could be that it's someone that they're working with or they're sitting next to who they're just not getting on with. Have you got any advice for people who are dealing with conflict sort of on a daily basis that is making their environment impossible? And that could be someone being rude to them, could be someone being off with them, or it could just be someone who is alienating them.
Yeah, well, getting two people to work together who aren't working together is quite an art. And as a mediator, we don't always get it right straight away the first time. And I can think of instances where it did take some time. Very often, though, it was actually helping person A to see the good things that person B does, and the similarities between the two, and the similarities of approach, of which there often are many, but one particular feature or one particular clash, one particular event has caused that split. And once they can see that probably they're working together along the same line and overall they've got the same objective and the same aims, you can move forward. And I can think of a number of instances where that has happened, where they've found actually that they were on the same side, but it's finding that common purpose, that way of working together, that respect for each other, getting that respect back which had gone just because of one incident. It's so often one incident. And the problem often is a communication one, where someone didn't respond quickly enough, they didn't respond in the right way, it escalated, it grew. If you strip it down and analyse that, and really you often find that there's
I think we often think people have different intentions on what they do from how they react. So getting to the bottom that actually, like you say, the intention is actually the same and the outcomes we want are the same. You're so patient to mediate. I can't understand how, I mean, I'm your daughter. I should be able to be that patient to mediate. And that's a question I have for you, actually. You're very calm, right? So from looking after my kids to working with difficult people to working with the Samaritans, with people who are highly strung and probably in a really difficult place. How do you stay so calm? Do you sometimes wonder whether forcing yourself, where does your stress go from these situations? That's what I'd like to know.
Interesting question.
Because I'd like to be as calm as you. Where's your outlet?
I wasn't always as calm as I might have been now. I think it's something perhaps you do learn to some extent. I do like to think about something first before acting rather than rushing in. In my early days, I rushed in too much. I like to think about it. I like to go through the different options first. Sometimes you've got to react quickly. Obviously, in a difficult situation, a crisis, you have to think on your feet. But it's having that balance again. It's having that balance, doing things that you want to do in addition to the things you have to do for your work. I think putting what you're dealing with in context. And I think of some of the worst things I had to deal with. I mean, I have a friend and a colleague who went through a terrible experience in terms of losing two members of her family in a short space of time. And came back from that to build an amazing charity, a charity I've worked with. And I sometimes think to myself, gosh, just put this in context. Compared with what that person had to deal with, you're making a lot of fuss about something that's very small indeed. I think I've gained more perspective through seeing how people cope with really big stresses.
I like that. So you look at it in perspective to other things.
Yes.
And I know that you have a lot of, if anyone's ever played table tennis against my dad, they'll realize that he apparently plays like a machine. So maybe that is where you get some of the outlet from. You put a lot of energy into it, and you really kind of, you could use that as a massive outlet.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I've always enjoyed sport, and I'm quite competitive in sport. So maybe that's where the yes,
thank you.
got that. Yes,
yeah. It's all right. Yes, to do that.
Yeah, that's where the competitive edge, the energy goes into, and I get totally immersed in a competitive game of league table tennis, for instance. And I used to be like that on the cricket field and in other sports I've played.
Definitely. No, you're a perfectionist, and that is something that definitely shows in your personality. But one thing that I always think of, management especially, the way that you can keep so calm in dealing with people, but people always respect you, because at school you were that head teacher who would be calm, but there would be a limit, and we would know that you don't want to get to that limit too often, because it's like a look of nope, that's enough, and you don't want to go. But you would never shout, you would never raise your voice. I think that's how all people should lead. If too many people pick up on tension and they follow through from that.
It's an interesting point. Again, I learnt in teaching early on that if you create your own atmosphere and your own ethos, your own sort of mood of a place. And I realised with some classes I was getting a little bit hyped up and I was getting a bit reactive. Well, this isn't working. You've really got to keep it. You've got to keep the overall tone down. Leaders need to see, we all need to see all the time, the mood that we create and express transmits itself right through the organisation. We have a huge responsibility, not just to do the right things, but create the right atmosphere.
Definitely. So inspirational. And honestly, I feel very lucky that I get to grow up listening to these pearls of wisdom. And I am sure that people who are listening today will pick up on some of this and they'll take it and they'll grow with it. And yeah, thank you so much. I have one final question.
Okay.
You're not getting away that easy.
Right.
If you were to pass one thing on to, let's use grandchildren for an example, but like our emerging world, what do you call it, Gen Z, millennials, or whatever it is, what would your one tip be for them? So growing up in a world that we live in today, in order to progress in the world, what would your tip be?
Take your time with every individual and look for the good in them. Everybody has good in them. And it might be someone that you don't perhaps click with terribly well, but always be seeking the good in that person and take your time with them. Don't write them off. Don't write things off. Give it time.
Brilliant. I love that answer. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming on the Christmas bonus episode of The Counter Offer. It's been very special for me, and I hope you've enjoyed your first podcast.
I have. Thanks for inviting me. It's been lovely to be here. Thanks, Susanna. Thank you.